Well, hello and welcome once again to the DCL podcast, where we're inviting you to sit back, relax, and we'll be on our way shortly. Well, welcome back to the DCL podcast, and this is part 2 of our discussion that we started before the holidays with Len Testa and Aaron Foster. Len had to leave the show a little bit early, so we pick it up with Aaron answering a few more questions about Disney Cruise Line and some of her thoughts on DCL, and then we move on into river cruising with Adventures by Disney, just kind of a really fun topic that Christy and I got to talk to her about. She's had the opportunity to go on 2 different cruises now with Adventures by Disney, so thanks for coming back and taking a listen, and with that being said, let's jump on into part 2 with Disney Cruise Line, the unofficial guide with Aaron Foster, and river cruising with Adventures by Disney. Sit back and enjoy, everyone. All right, so going to the restaurants then, have you been to Tiana's place with the Wonder?
I have not. So Len just left, and he and Laurel went, and I did not.
Okay. So I guess my question is, you've got Tiana's place on the Wonder, and we're going on that in May, I believe, out of California, out of San Diego. And then the Tangled restaurants come to the Magic. Do you see kind of more entertainment restaurants like this being placed on the ships in the future? Or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, it certainly looks that that's the way they're going with the Tiana's, and I'm assuming that the Tangled will have more interactive stuff. I think they were, one of the bars on the ships was doing a Tangled evening where they would have some games, and they'd have sort of the thug type guys come around and talk to you in the bar, and they had special Tangled themed snacks. So I think that was sort of their tryout for it. But yeah, I think that, there's only so much they can do with the food because, you're going to have a chicken, a fish, a red meat, and a vegetarian option. And they can keep theming, but it's still the food. And so the way they're going to draw people in and differentiate themselves from another line that is also serving the same, 4 entrees is to get the entertainment and specifically Disney themed entertainment in there. So yeah, I certainly think that that's a way that they're heading.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. We were on the Magic twice since Tangled started on the Magic, and they do that the night the night that they have the Tangled show in the theater. They have the guards come through your restaurant, kind of trying to find Flynn Rider. So they're interrogating the waiters, some of the tables, and it's kind of fun to watch. So yeah, it's a fun experience.
I mean, they're almost like the evil stepsisters at Disney World in the 1900 Park Fair, and the comic relief. It's fun to have fun. So yeah,
definitely. Or the stormtroopers walking around Hollywood Studios now, interrogating people. It's pretty entertaining. All right, how about the pool decks? Aqua Dunk or Aqua Duck? Which one are you a fan of?
I don't like the dunk. I don't like that. I have a little claustrophobia issue, so that tube thing is not so much for me. That the drop. Yeah, I mean, my kids love them both, and will do both over and over and over again. The trick is always to find a time when the line's not too big. So the standard tip is to go during dinner or go on a port day if you're not going to port, that sort of thing. But yeah, they're both great fun unless you have claustrophobia issues like I do.
And we took the Magic up to Norway, and there was no line the entire time. So that's go someplace cold, and there's no lines.
I did the Magic I did 2 summers out of Copenhagen. One the Norway, Iceland way, and then the next summer the Estonia, Russia way, and both times the pools were pretty full on the sea days, and it was chilly, but the kids, it's hard to stop kids from getting in the water.
Right. I've got a great picture of our kids standing on the deck by the glacier up in Alaska, and they're just freezing.
I was saying in their swimsuits.
In their swimsuits, yeah. We pulled them out of the pool. It's like, we got to take a picture of this quick.
Right.
And they're not happy with us, but it's a great picture. How about, so what would be kind of your favorite pool areas on the different ships that you've been on? Which place do you gravitate towards?
Well, adult pool. I like adult pools whenever I can get a chance, just for the quiet. It's for me. It's nice to sit and like Len said, sort of be in the nature, but away from the nature. So to have a little quiet time and be able to look at the ocean and read my book and have a frosty beverage, that sort of thing. So I like the adult areas. But yeah, I'm always up for hanging with my kids. Sometimes, I often get sucked into the Funnel Vision movies. I never sort of plan to go watch one, but sometimes I'll be walking by to, indulge in the soft serve or the chicken nuggets, and then I'll see something's playing, and I'll just sort of sit down, and usually it's a film I've already seen, so it doesn't matter if I'm there in the middle. But gosh, the last cruise I was on, I ended up watching the last 2/3 of Toy Story 3 and just like sobbing on deck into my nuggets. And like, what is happening? So yeah, it's fun to just go and not necessarily have a plan all the time, but let's see what starts to happen.
We were at the adult pool on our last cruise, and they had a guitar player that would come out about 4:00, and it was awesome. We just sat there for probably about an hour and listened to him play, and he'd take requests, and it was amazing.
I don't think I've ever seen entertainment out there. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. I've had it on the Fantasy before, for sure, and on the Magic, I think.
So talk about entertainment then. What are your kind of recommendations towards entertainment for families and adults?
There are obviously shows, Disney themed shows, at least half the nights on the longer cruises and almost every night on the shorter cruises. I tend to like the shows that are sort of retellings of the films more than the jukebox ones. So I like the Frozen and the Tangled and the Aladdin more than sort of like the Disney Dream, where they just are dropping in, or the Dreams or Wishes, where they're dropping in random songs with a sort of fake plot to tie them together. But some people like just hearing the songs. But I tend to, some of the newer shows that they put on, the Tangled show on the Magic, I like. It's the effects that they're able to do in the theater with the lanterns and the snow and the Frozen. It's a very immersive experience, and I like that a lot. There are also obviously sort of non-Disney entertainers that, ventriloquists and magicians and musicians and jugglers and all sorts of. My husband got hypnotized by the hypnotist, and that's a good family story. So the external performers often will have sort of smaller shows at some point during the ship in one of the lounges, and I often recommend that people peek into those to see if it's appropriate for their children. And it's obviously Disney, so it's going to be child appropriate, but if it's something that their children will enjoy, to see whether it's worth their time going to the big show in the main theater, or whether their kid might be better served by watching a movie in the room if they're overtired or that sort of thing.
I have a random question about the shows. On my first cruise with Disney, it was in, I don't know why I can't talk today, but it was the spring of 2014. And we were on the Fantasy, and they played Aladdin and a couple of other shows, I think, in the afternoon. So they had a matinee of it. Uh-huh. And I don't think I've ever seen that since then, but it was my favorite thing because my kid couldn't stay up late enough, and so we would do dinner and then we'd have to go to bed, which is frankly still the case. And we loved being able to go to those shows in the afternoon. Do you know why that one-off afternoon shows, why those were occurring, and if they'll ever come back?
I've seen it, in 15 or so cruises. I think I've seen it once or twice myself. It may just be the timing of the cast members, or they're experimenting, or I don't know. They've recently also been experimenting with showing the same show 2 nights in a row.
Yeah.
So I think they're just sort of playing around to see what works best for guests. That's a good point that I would hope that that one of their headliner shows they could make available in the afternoon to guests who are not night owls, or who had their only Palo reservation the night of the show, and give them another opportunity to see it. I agree that's something that could be helpful for many guests.
Well, what else you got, Steve?
Moving on to ports, trying to talk about port excursions is really tough because every family is different, every person's different on what they want to see. There's so much out there to do, and whether you book through Disney or book through somebody else is kind of up to you, price point wise and ease and everything else. But I thought the one thing that was really cool that you guys include in the guide on page 342 is you give people 20 questions to ask about choosing a port adventure. And one of them was like, how much time do you want to spend in, being transported to what you're going to see? And we just went on a cruise recently where we went to Warnemünde, Germany, and it's a 3-hour drive from the port to Berlin. So it's kind of the big day to visit Berlin. And for us, we're like, you know what? We don't want to spend 6 hours going back and forth to go see Berlin. And I thought that those 20 questions were really well thought out for people to kind of go through when they get to a port. If they're kind of having a hard time trying to decide what they want to do, I thought that really helps them out quite a bit.
Those are the questions that I asked myself and my family when we were deciding. And some cruises, some trips, you may decide that, 1 or 2 days, we are going to spend a lot of time in transportation. For us, it was Rome. We were going to spend whatever it was, 2 or 3 hours on the bus each way, because that was an experience that we wanted to have in Rome. But, maybe in Florence, we didn't want to do that. So it's some things to think about in balancing your trip in general, because you could do that one day, but if you were spending, hours and hours in transportation at every port, you'd get burned out pretty fast. So a lot of it is balance and understanding, why are you on vacation? Are you on vacation to relax? Are you on vacation to bond with your family? Are you on vacation to pack in as many sites as possible? People, you just really need to be honest with yourself about, is budget an issue? Are you, what is your motivation for being on this trip? And ask yourself some questions and be honest with yourself about the answers.
Perfect. Anyways, so I thought that was a really good guide to kind of give people kind of a way of thinking when they approach their port itineraries, I guess. So I thought that was really good in the book.
I wrote that, yay me.
Well, I think those were all the questions I had about just Disney Cruise Line in general. Is there one secret you'd be willing to give out about DCL that might make it easier for people on their next cruise that you do before we talk about river cruises?
Well, this is my husband's trick, not necessarily mine, but he will often pre-tip our stateroom host. Mm-hmm. So, we obviously do the guideline of tipping that Disney suggests. And we will also tip a little over and above afterward for our servers and for our host. But my husband will often give our stateroom host some cash up front. And we have found that, that gets us really, really, really attentive service. And such that, stupid stuff, like my daughters all have very long, very thick hair, and we go through a lot of conditioner. And we were just given buckets of conditioner, and like extra elaborate towel animals and that sort of thing. Just really, really attentive service. So that's one thing that my husband does that it seems to have worked out well for us.
Yeah, we've done that through the over the years as well. Yeah. That was always our little key to getting great service too. Do you think that a drink package is ever going to come to DCL like the other lines have?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Well, my first cruise was on the Wonder. I think it was in 2007, 2008. And back in the day, Disney did not include soda. You had to buy soda separately in a package. And my husband is an extremely avid Diet Coke drinker and hated that with a passion, and was thrilled that Disney discontinued having to pay for soda separately. But I understand that it's a cost factor, and if you're not a soda drinker, you might not want to have that extra fee. But I would have said no. Disney would never do that with alcoholic beverages until Disney in the parks has just starting in January in a couple of weeks.
Right,
they're adding alcohol to the dining plan in the parks so that a drink will be included. So, I don't know. It's certainly a possibility that Disney would add that. Yeah. I
never even considered where they might just allow you to have a drink with, a glass of wine or something with dinner, like they do on the river cruises, for example.
Right. Yes. And, this is probably a segue to the river cruise, but I went on the Danube river cruise, and the alcohol was included and it flowed very freely all the time, which was an interesting experience.
So you went on AMA with, and I have the book, but I haven't caught this part yet. So did you go through Adventures by Disney on their AMA ships?
Yes, I did. Yep.
Okay. And then for the listeners, really quick, what happened is Adventures by Disney, which we've talked about before, is the guided land portion of the Disney company. they have contracted out AMA Waterways ships for selected cruises, and they bring their own guide on board and things like that, and they run the ship for those particular weeks. And there are children's programs, which, I mean, not like a kids club, but there are activities geared for children, which you don't actually find on many traditional river cruises, which I think is excellent. And they have more connecting cabins. So that's a little housekeeping so that, everybody, your family can fit, because traditionally the cabins on river cruises only sleep 2.
Right. So Disney was involved in the ships that they use. They're AMA Waterways ships, but the ships that Disney uses are new, and they sort of partnered with AMA Waterways in creating the cabins, creating the ships. And so some of the cabins sleep 3, and many of those cabins connect to other cabins that sleep 2. So you can get a family of 5 sort of effectively in one room, which was very unusual for the river cruise experience.
And then do you want to just say briefly what the difference between a river cruise and a traditional cruise is? Sure.
I had been on this was my going on the river cruise was my 9th Adventures by Disney experience. And so, I can also talk about how the river cruise ABD is different than the land ABD. But the river cruising experience is very different from the ocean cruising. So the first thing to think about is the size of the ship. So even the Magic and the Wonder have about, I think it's 2,500 passengers. The maximum capacity of the river cruise ships is 156. So
just think about that for a second. 156.
It's
versus.
It's orders of magnitude different. Yeah. And I think on the one I went on, it was a pretty full ship, and we had 140. So the size of the ship is much different, obviously, and you're much closer to the shore at all times. So there was I can't think of a single time where we couldn't see the shore on the river cruise, and you're so close that literally. Your room, we were on the second deck, and that's the deck that's sort of at street level. We could look at our balcony and step up, when we were docked, step up onto the street. We had to make sure our door was closed and locked when we left, because people from the street could step into our cabin if they had wanted to, which we didn't. But, we had there was a guitar player one evening in the lounge, and the ship pulled over to let him off at his house, like that.
Wow.
Sort of like on an ocean cruise, if you, if you're tardy and you miss the departure, you're trying to charter a ship or a helicopter or, spending tons of money to get back to the ship. Here, it's like you could get an Uber to the next stop. It's that much more intimate, and there are fewer spaces. So there's one coffee lounge, there's one sort of bar, there's one and a half-ish dining rooms, and you're seeing the same people over and over and over again for the week. So on an ocean ship, you might not encounter the same person ever again. You're seeing the same people over and over, and so it's really an opportunity to make more in-depth friendships with the other passengers and also with the cruise staff. They know you by name, not just your stateroom host, but pretty much everybody, all the waiters, all the officers. Everybody knows everybody's name, and it's a very intimate experience, very personalized, and the rules are a little more flexible and a little more personal on the river ship. So, for instance, we took my oldest daughter 3 days before she turned 18 on an Alaskan cruise on the Wonder. And we wanted to take her to Palo and thought maybe they would bend the rules, and they just simply wouldn't. They're like, no, she's not 18. I'm like, she's a high school graduate. They're like, we don't care. And so they were extremely strict about that on the Wonder. On the AMA trip on the ABD River Cruise, my younger daughters were about 17, and the adult dining there was advertised for 18 and up, and they just asked us, oh, do you want to bring your kids? And even though we didn't ask, they were like, yeah, they seem old enough, they're fine, So it's much more personal, it's much more flexible. And another thing that's really important for me, I tend towards seasickness a little, which is also another reason why I tend to like the gentler Mediterranean waters. But there is literally no seasickness issue on the river cruises. So if that's something that's an issue for you, that's a huge reason to go on the river cruise as opposed to an ocean cruise.
That's great to know for me.
And I thought the food on the river cruise was extraordinary. That sometimes on the ocean cruises, much of it's good, some of it's mediocre. You can occasionally get a bad meal. There was nothing that was not extraordinary on the river cruise. And I think a lot of that is that they're just doing much smaller volumes, so there's less that's frozen, less that's prepackaged, and they're, because they're stopping at a real port every day, they're getting fresh produce, fresh bread every day from, artisanal European bakeries and that sort of thing. So, and the wine and the beer free flows at all hours on your excursions on the ship. They say in the documentation you can have a glass of wine at lunch. They were walking around with bottles and bottles. You want some more? Sure, have some more. Nice. If you have issues with alcohol, that's maybe something to be aware of, because seriously, it was hard to avoid. But if you like to have a glass of wine with your meal, then by all means, consider that an included thing.
I am the resident food allergy gal on this podcast, so. Did you experience anybody, and I believe that they can handle it, but I guess I was wondering to what level, did you experience anybody around you dining that had to eat gluten-free for a medical reason?
I'm trying to think. I don't particularly recall gluten-free. We were traveling with my parents, and my father has a severe shrimp and strawberry allergy, and they were very accommodating to him and making sure that they asked him at different meals, and people would come up and point out things that he couldn't eat and that sort of thing. So yeah, I'm sure if you worked with them, they would be able to help. It's Disney is running it, and they want to make sure you're having a good experience. So yeah. And
then what about kids? So you obviously had your teenagers.
I had teenagers with me, yes. The age, and I think they've tinkered with it since they first advertised it. I think the minimum age they're advertising now is 4 for the river cruises, and the recommended age is 8.
I think you're right about that as well. It's between 6 and 8 you're out.
Right. So we had on the one that I went on, we had 1 5-year-old and maybe 3 or 4 7-year-olds, and then maybe 15 kids that were in the sort of 8 to 12 range, and then another 8 or 10 that were in the teenage range. And they had activities for them. Most nights there was a movie or some sort of local magician or something like that in the lounge for the kids while the parents had their meals. But the kids were welcome in the dining room at any time. There was, they up in the lounge, they would have things like, the nuggets and the pigs in a blanket and sort of things for kids. But they would also, if the kid wanted Chateaubriand from downstairs, they would bring it up to them or whatever. So there's no dedicated kid space, but during the evenings, there was always several of the ABD cast members who were there to make sure the kids were having an age-appropriate time. And then on the excursions, and excursions are a very big part of the river cruise experience. They're all included. There's no extra fee for them like there is on the ocean cruises. So every day you would get a menu of between 2 and 5 or 6 things that you could do each day. And some of them were outdoorsy, a biking experience, or a visit to a farm, and some were museum experiences, or a cultural walk, or a historical tour, and some were food experiences, help go make jam with these people, or molding chocolate, or that sort of thing. And some of those were very specifically designed for children, but even at the sort of cultural museum-y ones, they would always be at least 1, if not 2 or 3 of the guides that would have the kids, and they would let the parents go do the sort of more brainy things, and they would take the kids at a museum stop in the garden and, do some activity with the sculpture in the garden, or let them play Frisbee on the lawn for part of the time. So they were always making sure that the kids were doing age-appropriate things, and well supervised, even on the sort of more quote-unquote boring parts of the excursions.
That's great information.
You talked about you've been on ABD and then also ABD with the river cruises, and I'm kind of getting a sense it's a bigger group on the river cruise than in most of the ABD trips themselves. What other differences did you see between the two, just out of curiosity?
Okay, so on the land-based ones, there's a maximum of 40 guests, and most of the ones I've been on have had more like 32, 34, somewhere on there, and they have 2 guests, and everybody does. I mean, 2 guides for those, say, 40 guests, and they do everything together all the time, and there's not really any opportunity for customization. So everybody goes to this museum, everybody goes to this farm, everybody does this thing together, and you get to know your guides incredibly well, but maybe there are some things that you would rather do differently. On the river cruise, there's 8 guides for the, say, 150 or so guests, and it's the same guest to staff ratio, but there's a lot more mixing and matching. So, like I said, there's a menu of activities you can do every day, and so you might choose to do the biking trip on day A, and then you would be with this subgroup of 15 guests and 2 guides that chose that. And then the next day you would be on the museum trip with 2 different guides and another 30 guests, so it's the ratio is the same, but there's a lot more mixing and matching. But I will say that in the times we were on the ship, in the lounges and at dinner, all of the ABD guides made a real effort to get to know as many of the guests as they possibly could. And they would sit with us and ask us about our experiences and try to offer suggestions on things that we could do or, experiences that might help us enjoy the trip more. We had one little thing where we were at a castle in Estonia and a donkey bit my daughter's hand, and they were incredibly accommodating.
Oh, no.
They're like really all over us. Can we help you? Can we get you medical attention? Here's some things to make her better. And they were just, everybody's really looking out for you. But it's you're not the same. You're not with the same people 24/7. But it's, on the other hand, you get to choose some things that are maybe a little more interesting or a little more appropriate for you.
A little bit more flexible.
Right, exactly.
So I am so in love with this topic. So so you said you had choices on the river cruise. Did you get to know those choices before the cruise started?
Yeah, they're all on the website. So you can choose in advance, but then, you can see what they are in advance, but they sat down with us on the first day. Individual ABD guides would sit with your family and really explain even more in depth about what the activities were. And, like I said, when we did it, we were with my parents who were in their 70s, and they explained this sort of, this one is physically challenging. This one isn't physically challenging. This one involves more transportation time. This one doesn't. This one involves this kind of food. Do you have an allergy? Is that okay? They really would sit down with every family personally for, a good half hour, and you would be able to choose on the first day which of the things you wanted. But we could actually even change sort of last minute. Like, there was one family who chose in advance sort of every incredibly strenuous thing. And by day 3, they were like, can we do the thing where we just sort of sit around and drink a lot? And they were perfectly happy to switch it all up for them. So, yeah, but they're all on the website now. You could check them out and sort of get a general idea of what the offerings are right now.
Did any of the excursions sell out? Were you limited?
Nope. They would just, if, because there's a fixed number of guests, if more people wanted to do one than the other, they would just add more guides and, hire another bus. So no, there was no, we never experienced a sellout of an excursion. And I have had friends on, half a dozen other of the river cruises, and they've never experienced that either.
Did any of them not go, if that makes sense? So were there any of that nobody signed up for them, so they just said?
I did not experience that, and I know there were a couple that went with like just 4 guests, but I didn't hear. I'm sure if nobody signed up, they would not run it. But I think that even with just a handful of guests, they would run it. Yeah.
Which river were you on?
I went on the Danube.
And I guess to throw it out there quick, right now they're running cruises on the Danube and on the Rhine, and then they also have specialty cruises as well, like an Oktoberfest cruise. A holiday Danube cruise. I'm sorry.
And there's a food and wine one as well.
Yeah.
So, Steve, I think we have to figure out how to do a DCL podcast food and wine Rhine cruise.
I think adults only, so you can get to leave your kids.
Right?
Yeah, we'll have to look into that. I would love to do one of these, in all honesty. Yeah.
And there's a holiday Rhine cruise where you go to the Christmas markets and things like that as well.
It was fun. It was a really fun experience.
What time
of year did you go?
I went in early August, started in late July into early August.
Was it this last year that you went?
It was in 2016.
Okay. So the first year they did it, right? That was the first year?
Yep.
What was your favorite stop, or what was one of your favorite stops?
There was bits and pieces of all of them that were great. I had never been to Budapest, and I just thought it was a beautiful, beautiful city. So on our last night there, we did the city lights up all of their sort of historical buildings with lights, almost like the country's in Illuminations in Epcot, but it's real. And we spent an hour just going down the Danube, looking at the beautiful lights of Budapest. And that was, it was really magical. And the ship has, based on the weather, they open up the pool. There's a small pool on deck, or it happened to be chilly that night, and they brought up like these nice fleece blankets for everybody, and coffee and hot toddies and stuff, just looking at the lights of the Danube. It was really magical. Very lovely.
Are you booking to go on the Rhine?
My oldest daughter, she's graduating from college this year, and we're waiting to hear what she's doing next year. And as soon as we know what her timing is, that's truly, I have two things I want to do this summer. One of them is go back on the Wonder on the Alaska cruise, and to get on the Rhine cruise. So those are my two goals for this summer.
Well, let's talk a little bit about booking one of these river cruises. With DCL, it's kind of known out there that, the sooner you book it, generally the better price you're going to get. How about with the river cruisers, pricing-wise, and then also just availability-wise, as far as having slots available? The
pricing is fixed, so it's not. I will say there actually is some variation depending on date. So, but it's all advertised. So there's a little bit of a fluctuation, but it's not like on DCL. If you book the day cruises are released, you get a lower rate than if you book 6 months later. It's not like that on the river cruises. Everything is advertised at the beginning, and the prices don't change. So you can understand what you're getting. Yeah, is it possible that some of them will sell out? Yes, absolutely. So there are wait lists, and I've heard of people getting pulled off the wait list. But if it's something you absolutely want to do on a certain date, earlier is better, because you're not going to have a price break by waiting. Although I will say occasionally there are some travel agents that will offer discounts if you book early or whatever. So that's something worth looking into. But Disney doesn't very often.
Or I think because I think in the beginning for sure, when they were just having a hard time filling their sailings, they did offer some discounts towards the end when they weren't filling. And then one other point on the pricing is that typically with these types of trips, the lower category rooms would sell out first. So then you would, in theory, pay a little bit higher because you have to book a higher category room. So you're maybe getting something more for it, but you're still booking maybe higher than you would have if you had planned in advance.
Right. We did a pretty thorough investigation of comparing prices on the ocean cruises and the river cruises. And the river cruises, frankly, are significant amount more. They're expensive. It's a luxury product like ABD is in general. But the other thing to think about is that virtually everything is included. So on the ocean cruise, everything is extra. If you want alcohol, it's extra. If you want to go on an excursion, it's extra. If you want entertainment, sometimes it's extra. But everything, if you want port transfers, it's extra on the ocean cruise. All of those things are included with the base price of the river cruise. Your tips for your servers, your tips for your guides, or actually the tips for the guides. Yeah, the tips for the guides are included in the river cruise, and they aren't on regular ABD. Your transfer from the airport or the hotel to the ship is included. Tons of alcohol is included. All of your excursions are included. So the price is the price on the river cruise, where it's not the price on the ocean cruise.
Was it about $5,000 or so a person?
I'm trying to remember. This was, about 2 years ago when I paid for it. But yeah, that sounds approximately right. Yeah.
So I have a young son. He's 4. We're not going yet. I'm not even going to go.
I would wait.
But I don't want to wait until he's 17. So what age, when should I put this in my bucket? When should I put this in my chart of vacations for us?
I think that the kids, that there were a couple, like I said, there were a couple kids that were 5 and 6. They were getting tired. Some of these excursions are long, and there's a lot of walking around and looking at things. And those kids, they were kept entertained and they were kept safe. But I think that the days were getting a little long for them. Personally, I think maybe 8 to 11 or 12 is sort of perfect for this, that they can start to appreciate, the culture. And I love cruising in Europe, the river cruise and the ocean cruise, because you can see all these incredible cultural sites and you only have to unpack once.
Yeah.
To me, that is the height of luxury and decadence, to see all this culture and not have to schlep, That's just one thing I love. But yeah, the kids that were, sort of 8, 9 and up, and even the teens were having a great time. And after a while, the teens really bonded, and they would stay up late on deck. There's on the ship we were on, there was a giant sort of life-size chessboard, and they were up there playing chess and doing yoga on deck at midnight, that sort of thing. Just really having a great time bonding with each other.
Oh, that sounds great. Do you have any more, Steve, river cruise questions?
What surprised you the most about river cruising? This is your first river cruise you'd ever been on. What surprised you the most about it that you weren't expecting?
I guess I didn't really, I had been told, but I didn't really understand how much part of the city you are. That we would dock and we would be literally steps away from a quaint cafe. I mean, even in, think about the Alaska ocean cruises, you're pretty much in town, but you've got to walk, 100 yards or something like that to get to the town. You are in the town. And these river cruise ships are all very, there are dozens of them out on the river at any one time, and they're all very similar size. And the docks in some of the cities are so popular that the ships will actually sort of stack up one in front of each other. I'm not explaining it very well, but they're packed in a line. And so if you happen to be in the farthest out position, you literally have to walk across 1 or 2 or 3 other ships to get to the dock. And so we were on this Amish ship, and we went through a couple of Viking ships to get to the shore, which was just sort of funny. That's what their lounge looks like, but it's very, you're very much part of the city in a way that you couldn't possibly be on an ocean cruise.
It's pretty funny to see them stacked next to each other. So is that the only other ship you walked through was the Viking?
We walked through several. I'm not remembering exactly what they were, but, they were all very similar in size. I think the passenger capacity of almost all of them is within 5 people. And, the appointments of the lounges are all, different decor, but similar. We obviously didn't get to see any of the cabins or experience any of the service on the other ships. So, it's a little hard to compare. But yeah, we did walk through several others.
Transferring over to ABD just a little bit, because you've had so many experiences. How many have your kids been on with you? Various
of my kids have been on 8 with me. And I'm trying to figure out. I just only went on one, the Wyoming one, with a girlfriend, but my kids were at least one of my kids was with me on all the others.
And what has been your favorite? Which experiences have you been on?
We did 2 of the ABD add-ons to the ocean cruise. So we did the ABD add-on to the Mediterranean cruise and the ABD add-on to Baltic going toward Russia, that one. So that's 2, Germany, Wyoming, Costa Rica, Peru, China. Did I say Germany? I don't know. I feel like I'm leaving something out. But by far our favorite was China, mostly because we would never have been able to do that trip on our own. It was incredible, astounding, and such an overwhelming country that I really felt like the guide was necessary and made the trip what it was.
Wow. I'm just back here in awe.
I mean, like I can see that, we did the ABD Germany, and it was a really fun experience, and it was great, and my kids loved it. But a lot of it is the language. And so we were learning German words, so I could figure out that Schloss was lake and Strasse was street. And by, day 4, I was starting to pick up on what some of the words meant. And I knew that I could learn eventually, if I tried, this is direction A, this is direction B, that sort of thing. When we got to China, I was so overwhelmed that I couldn't even figure out where the words started and stopped. And so I knew that I would never even make it out of the airport without some help. And the guides really were able to provide that in a way that made me feel safe and confident, even though I was completely overwhelmed by the experience.
Yeah, I've had the opportunity to go to Japan, and I've been on the subway. And if you're downtown Tokyo, it's also written in English, so it kind of it's a little bit more familiar to us. But I've been kind of on the outskirts, and I've looked at a map in kanji, so the kind of the way they write over there, and with the station, the way it's written at the station, the way it looks on the map looks completely different. So I can totally see what you're talking about as far as being overwhelmed in China.
There was almost no English translation to go along with that. So
how was the food over there?
We really liked it. I mean, my family eats a lot of we live in the New York City area, and so we eat a lot of fairly authentic Chinese food at home. We had really, really good experiences with the food. Some of it was sort of, Peking duck that you would be able to get in a large city here, that has a Chinatown. Some of it was pretty wacky. We were in the Gumdrop Mountains, and they offered us snake wine, which was basically like grain alcohol with a snake in it. Wow. But I tried it. And it tasted like grain alcohol with a snake in it, but, a scorpion on a stick. So there were lots of sort of, to us, wacky things to try if you wanted to. But they were also, there were some timid kids on our trip as well. And they were pretty good about finding them, plain rice and plain chicken and that sort of thing. So, yeah, it was quite good to me. And there was enough sort of interesting odd things to make it fun for the culturally, food ambitious. And then there were also sort of plain things for people who wanted to take it easy.
So kind of looking back on your experiences with ABD with your children, and I know that this is another one of those, there's no right or wrong answer as far as it goes. It kind of depends upon, like you're talking about your daughter, she could have easily eaten at Palo, but for whatever reason, they have a hard line there. What age do you think your kids got the most out of it? In other words, rather than just being along for the ride, where they were actually kind of coming back with more than just, does that make sense what I'm asking?
Yeah. The first one we did was Costa Rica, and my twins were just turned 8. And even from there, we had a great experience. And that's, I think, why we've been back so much to ABD, that they really make it personal. And so they could see, you're falling behind. Let me try to make this easier for you. You need a little bit more adventure. Let me point you in this direction. That sort of thing. And like a couple of the guides more than once. And so they've gotten to know us, and they know that I'm like a Disney geek. And so they'll point out like little parts of our tour that are sort of Disney adjacent. This restaurant is the one that we were in Rome. This restaurant is the inspiration for the restaurant in Italy in Epcot, and they would point me over there, that sort of thing. The age of the kid, I personally think somewhere around 7 or 8. You want to think about how many time zones you're going through and how much your kid has traveled in the past. Are they a good traveler? If your kid is in a sort of defiant phase, you might want to postpone it for a while, that sort of thing. But if your kid is a good traveler in general, certainly the ones that only go to 1 or 2 time zones away, they're definitely able to accommodate an 8-year-old there. The ones like the China one where you're taking a 14-hour flight, that sort of thing, or I haven't yet been on South Africa or Australia. I have several friends that have bucket list. Those you might want to wait until your kid is a really strong traveler and is able to adjust to, some pretty heavy sleep deprivation or challenges, that sort of thing. And so maybe that's more like a 12, 13-year-old sort of minimum. But, you have to know your kid. But if you're not going through too many time zones, they're really able to accommodate, sort of a definitely a late elementary school age kid.
So for people that might be looking to take their kids to Australia or Africa, it took me about a day and a half. When I was 14, we went to Australia because I have family there. It literally took me a full day and a half to even be able to function at all. Right. And so I would keep that in mind to get there early and do pre-days so that you can start. And I remember, so I don't remember much of the trip, but which is horrible. And they say, make sure you're old enough to remember. And so you'd think at 14, right? But I don't remember every element of that trip. So that's why I tell people, take your kid any age you want, because they still might not remember everything. But I remember very clearly being so exhausted.
Yeah. I'm trying to think how old my kids were. I think my kids were 13 and 16 when we did China. And yeah, we went 2 days in advance, and maybe 3 days in advance would have been even better. They sort of build up the trip, and so they make it a little easier the first couple days, because they know on these ones that are very far away that people are still sort of adjusting to the time issues. And they also will. This is a situation where they do build in some travel time that's helpful. For instance, on China, there are several internal flights of, like 3 or 4 hours long. They're showing you this whole giant country. So it's almost like they're showing you New York and Orlando and Chicago and Vegas, and so it's that sort of thing. But those intermediate flights were incredibly helpful because everybody slept on them. And it was a good sort of, get your energy back for this sort of very intense travel.
You kind of went to all these places before they were the places to go. You were such a pioneer. Like Costa Rica is just a place people go now. And China even is a place people go.
I'm a trendsetter. What can I say?
You are. All right. So do you have any booked now?
Do I have any booked now? No, I don't actually. And it's because my kids are in a sort of transition phase. Like I said, my oldest daughter is about to graduate from college, and my youngest daughter's just started college. And so we're waiting to see, what are they doing during the summer. But normally my family is a planned 15, 18 months out sort of family. And the fact that we are not able to do that is making my husband really, really, really crazy. So hopefully we'll get a lot of good stuff in this summer, but we don't know exactly what it is yet.
Well, sometimes that works out too.
Yeah. I have several Disney World trips booked, but that's not as exciting as China. I mean, it's very exciting, but not as exciting as China.
Well, I can feel for your husband, because we're kind of the same way. We have everything booked out through 2019 already, so.
Yeah. I booked a 2020 cruise for myself last week.
Oh, okay, I'm impressed.
It was a really good price for a break of when my kids should be off school, and he'll be in school then. And so I was like, there's no price increase. I don't know what to do with this. Yeah. And so I said, well, let's just do it.
Jump on it while you can. Exactly.
Yeah.
So one last question about ABD, I guess. It can be a little, I'll be honest, we've looked at it. It's definitely on our bucket list to do one of the trips. I would think that maybe the first person looking at it can be a little overwhelming with all the information, with all the different trips that are available. Disney or the ABD site's got a lot of information on it. Most people probably come into it with an idea, I want to go to Germany, I want to go to Australia, whatever else. Do you guys have a site on the Touring Plans website that kind of covers people's experiences? So if you could narrow, hey, it's either going to be Germany or Italy, let's go see what people's experiences are. Is that available on the Touring Plans website as well?
It's not, because we just haven't had that much demand. I have personally written, I think, 5 or 6 blog articles about my ABD experiences, and I'm happy to answer questions if somebody wants to shoot me a question on the Touring Plans website. I'm happy to answer based on my experiences, but we haven't. It's such a specialized thing that we haven't had that much demand for a fully dedicated portion of the site, other than the several blog articles that I've written about ABD.
Okay, yeah, I know it's a pretty specialty product, but I'm just kind of curious. Any other questions, Christy?
No, but I want to book something for 2021 now.
I will say that I'm going to give a little plug to my friends on the Disney Moms panel, that many of them have been on ABD trips, and that's a free site that you can ask as many questions as you want about anything ABD. And so I'm sure those folks would be happy to answer questions about ABD there.
I actually never would have considered that for the Moms panel question. That's great. That's a great tip.
Well, thank you so much for coming on today, Erin. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to talk to us.
No problem.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
And if you're willing, or if you're up for it, we'd love to maybe have you back every now and then. Maybe talk a little bit more ABD, and definitely Disney Cruise Line if you're up for it.
Absolutely. Sounds great.
Awesome. Well, I want to wish you and your family happy holidays as it comes up. And once again, thanks for coming on and talking ABD, river cruising, and DCL.
Absolutely. Happy to do it. Nice to talk with you.
Erin, did you want to plug where people could find you?
I'm on Twitter at Mom's Panel Erin, and you can find our book, Unofficial Guide to Disney Cruise Line, on Amazon and many bookstores. And I'm on touringplans.com all the time.
Just to kind of close it out, I really love your guys' books because so many guidebooks out there, and I've used a lot of them in the past, they just kind of regurgitate the information. It's like, this is Prague, and this is what you could do in Prague, but you guys kind of give your opinions. And I really appreciate that aspect of having kind of somebody's ideas and kind of opinions on when they approach their travel. So I really love your guys' books, and I encourage anybody to go out there and pick up a copy either through Amazon, through your local bookstore, or download it on Kindle.
That's so nice. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks again, Erin, and we will talk to you soon, I hope.
Okay, great. Sounds good.
Well, that is going to wrap up today's show. I really want to thank Erin Foster for coming on and providing all the information and thoughts on Disney Cruise Line, Adventures by Disney, and especially Adventures by Disney River Cruising. What an amazing opportunity to go on those type of trips. If you want to reach out to Erin, she was once again one of the original Moms Park Panel moms, and you can find her on Twitter at Moms Panel Erin. Go ahead and follow her there. She's got a lot of different fun things that she posts on a regular basis. Also, we had a change in our logo recently, and wanted to give a shout out to Kevin Quigley, who did it from wildmemoryproductions.com. If you have any type of artwork that you need done for either a podcast or maybe your own business or something like that, Kevin has his own business. He's a huge Disney fan. You can follow him, and where I found him was on the 3028. If you're a fan of Disney history, or Disney Listry as they like to do, he and Matt Parrish have a really fun podcast over at the 3028. And once again, if you want any artwork done, I highly encourage you to go to his website, wildmemoryproductions.com. And once again, you can always find us over on Facebook at the DCL Podcast, and you can reach me on Twitter between now and our next show at DCL Podcast. And of course, you can always catch Christy on her Twitter handle as well, PackYR, Pixie Dust. And if you've enjoyed this show and others that you've listened to, and you know somebody else who could benefit from listening to it and would like to share it, we really would appreciate it if you'd go ahead and share our show to some of your friends as well. So if you have any travels, or if you're heading out on your next cruise between now and our next show, all of us here at the DCL Podcast want to wish you fair winds and safe travels as you head out on your next adventure. Once again, thanks for coming back and taking a listen, and we'll see you next time on the DCL Podcast.